Hey everyone, it's me HawkeyeG here with another campaign starter guide. This guide is for the Knights of Caledor faction on the Mortal Empires map. This is definitely one of the tougher campaigns out there right now, but they do give you some decent tools to work with to get the advantages you need. So in this video I'm going to be covering what I think are your key buildings and building considerations for this faction, your key military units and army compositions, what your short-term campaign goals and strategy should be, and what your long-term campaign strategy looks like. So with that in mind, let's jump into a level and go through the guide. Alright, so I'm kind of jumping in a little bit in progress to a campaign, so I can talk about the first couple sections I mentioned. So we're going to start by looking at the key buildings and building considerations. There's really not too much to talk about here, but I want to talk about a couple of things in this starting province, right? So in the Fortress of Vorag, you do start with this unique building. It gives you a decent amount of income, which is nice, kind of helps offset certain things in the early game, although it can kind of impact your growth, right? You got to find a spot to get the growth building in there at some point. But this gives you money, and honestly, you're going to need a decent bit of money in this campaign. The early game does focus a little bit on some of the higher tier or higher quality units, and thus more expensive. And on obviously the construction cost reduction for all buildings does give you a little bit of vampiric corruption, which is strange, but whatever. Just a little building to take note of. And then the more important unique building here we have is this dragon graveyard. So you can see this building is great. This is probably the most important building you have in this entire campaign, okay? If you look at the bonuses it gives you a decent amount of income, public order, untainted, so that 5 untainted heavily counters this vampiric corruption. I mean, you've got Skaven off to the side when you start, so it counters that as well. Gives you a garrison that's pretty decent, so that it can hopefully help hold this location. And it allows for recruitment of dragon princes at tier 3, not to mention it reduces your upkeep cost for dragons and dragon princes for all your armies. Now, if you remember from the faction introduction, Imric's like army gets a decent number of bonuses to that, in addition to his own upkeep cost reduction on it. And you have the recruitment duration for dragons. You have some rights that will give you bonuses for dragons and for dragon prince units. So really, this is great. This is everything. This building has everything that you need for this campaign. This is super important. As for the rest of it, it's kind of tough. You can see I've kind of got a mismatch of buildings in here. I have the Elven Forge because I really like getting some Eagle Claw bolt throwers. It's nice to have the siege attacker. It's nice to have a piece of artillery in general, especially if you're playing like the more defensive battle type. If you're playing, range unit heavy, it's nice to be able to force the enemy to approach you. So a couple things in mind, right? You do want to get dragons because they're going to be useful for Imric. Their upkeep will be somewhat reduced, and you have this building that reduces them further. Just the bonuses that Imric gets, if you can get yourself to dragons early on, that's good. You can, in the early game, kind of manage by getting dragons from those quest battles, right? From the dragon encounters. I mean, if we look here, I know I don't have any right now. Haven't messed around with that too much. But you can get them that way as well, so there's still a way to get a couple of them in the early game. What you really want is to kind of get yourself to a point where you can win those fights in the first place. And now that I've put a little more time into this campaign, honestly, as long as you have a couple of good like hero units and some magic, it is possible to win those fights with just spearmen and archers. I would say there's like 1 or 2 of them that are a bit tougher, and you're definitely going to want at least like a handful of dragons or some upgraded either spearmen or upgraded archers. But you can beat a couple of those dragon fights without that, with just an army that looks like this or even a little bit lesser. So it's possible to get yourself a couple dragons before you really get to higher tiers. Of course, I'm tier 4 here. I shouldn't even be building this Elven Artisan building because we already have the income here. So this is something you would want, like this is where you would want to consider putting in dragons. And then I'm using this second province to get the mages building because this is going to get you the requirements you need. You can start building towards your military unlocks, right? We're going to need the upgraded version of the mages building and the upgraded version of the smithy building in order to get our tier 3 research. Not that it's, a ton of useful stuff in there, but it is, I don't know, generally it is pretty good. I shouldn't say there's a ton of, there is a decent amount of useful stuff. Though the one real question is, because you have these limited provinces, you have to find a place to get the Shrine of Asuryan in. Since you're going to want dragons and you're probably going to want like hero units and other stuff like that in your starting province, you might not have room for the Shrine of Asuryan. So just keep that in mind. You'll probably want to try to fit it into the Flayed Rock when you can. The reason you want to fit that in is because of how High Elf research works, because you're going to want this, right? Like the cultural advancements, these are going to take you less time to research than a lot of the stuff in Tier 3. So just keep that in mind as well. Some of these are going to be pretty good. Yeah, I mean, besides that, I wouldn't say it really deviates too much from a standard High Elf campaign. You could build you could build the low tier cavalry building, but I actually don't think it's worth it. If we go and take a look here, right, 193 upkeep for Dragon Princes in Imric's army, and Silver Helms are 250 base, right? And this building doesn't give you upkeep reduction for Silver Helms. Imric's trait doesn't give you upkeep for Silver Helms, right? Astride the battlefield, this does give you the recruit rank, speed, and charge bonus for them, but literally Dragon Princes are cheaper than Silver Helms for Imric, so why would you bother? It's not really worth building the low tier cavalry building. Maybe for, I don't know. We could say maybe for other armies, but for other armies you might as well just throw a couple of Dragon Princes in there, because you'll still have this upkeep reduction buff like bonus from this building anyway. So yeah, I don't really think that the low tier cavalry is super worth it. And I've talked about this. I want to say I talked about it in the faction introduction. You could go for like have a lot of Dragon Princes and dragons in Imric's army, but I did already say like dragons should kind of be a priority for you in the early game. But other than that, because there's not really that many faction bonuses for Imric's, like faction-wide bonuses for the Knights of Caledor, you kind of want to go pretty standard with High Elves, right? You probably just want to end up getting Sisters of Avalorn here. I usually like to get a couple of Phoenix Guard in there. You're going to want some dragons, but we already are planning on getting dragons. And so really the only difference is you should probably consider throwing a couple Dragon Princes into some of your armies so you can get more benefits from some of these rights and from some of the upkeep reduction, right? So that's really the only thing I'd say is really different, is consider adding a couple of Dragon Princes into your armies instead. One last thing I do want to say as well is that walls are going to be pretty essential in this campaign. It's regardless of like which route you go, and I'll talk about this later, right? But you might want to go down south and fight here. You might want to fight up north. The greenskins are going to be stronger than you. Unless the dwarves do really, really well and get lucky, which isn't likely, the dwarfs are going to be stronger than you, right? So it's pretty inevitable that you're going to be attacked by them. Like, you're going to want walls in most of these western settlements. I mean, you can see I don't have it set up here because I'm currently protecting that with Imric. But I honestly, at this point, I would say I probably had demolished some of the walls, but even in the Fortress of Vorag, right? Because it's not really too difficult for them to kind of sneak through right to here and then just run down here or take the underway, and now all of a sudden your capital is besieged by somebody unexpectedly. The same thing can happen with the Skaven too. So setting up defenses in this western side is pretty important. Now the other, like, when you decide if you're going to fight the Greenskins or the Skaven, which we'll talk about later, then you can kind of consider taking down some of your walls if you have the armies to protect them. But we'll get to that when we get to that. I guess there is one other thing I kind of wanted to mention, and that is just that, like, this area exists. It's a bunch of ports, and it in fact has a unique port building, which gives you a good amount of money and resources. So we've already talked about like military buildings and research buildings that you're going to place in these first two provinces. This third province you want to take because this is going to be a pretty good economic province for you, especially once you get some elven embassies built to increase income from all ports in this province, and you're making 800 from this port, you're making 800 from this port, you're making another 400 here, right? So that's 2,000, and then every embassy adds another 200 to it. So you can make a decent bit of money here, despite the fact that it's going to be unpleasant climate and give you a little bit less income. So I think that should cover everything that we want to talk about for the buildings. Like I said, it's not like too different or too special, just a couple of things to keep in mind, a couple of little tips and tricks. So let's talk about army composition. Honestly, I already talked about it a decent amount with the building composition, right? Like I said, you want to consider adding some dragon princes to your armies, right? You want to try and get dragons maybe a little earlier in this campaign than you normally would. You'll have this upkeep reduction, and you can see here I have 3 provinces and only 1 army. Maybe that's you could call it a mistake. That's why I've said building walls, but that's what Imric is for, right? That's his specialty. Is he doesn't give a lot of faction bonuses, but his army itself is really strong, and so that's kind of what you want to focus on early game. So getting him some dragons is going to be useful. Yeah, I really shouldn't have this craftsman building here. This should be a building to start recruiting me dragons. So just some, like I said, for Imric's army specifically, you could go a little bit heavier into like cavalry and dragons, make for some interesting field and siege battles. But besides that, like for his faction, like I said, the only real difference is you're going to want to consider adding in like some dragon princes to your army, just because they're a little bit more affordable and they're going to get some bonuses from the different rights that you have. But yeah, besides that, since Imric really gets all the big bonuses, there's not a lot that's different. I recommend sticking to a pretty typical high elf army composition, and yeah, maybe just finding some ways to replace a couple of units with dragon princes instead. So, with those things covered, let's talk about your early game, short-term campaign goals and strategy. We're going to hop over to turn 1 so you can kind of get a look at what that looks like, and we'll kind of progress through the campaign from there. Alright, so here we are on turn 1, and of course, with any like challenging campaign, there's a lot of important things that happen in the early game, so it's one of the more important things to discuss and have a solid strategy for. Keep in mind that your starting army has a unit of dragon princes, an actual dragon, Imric, who's mounted with a unique item, and you start with the fire mage, okay? These tools are going to be the most important things to you in the early game. It's what's going to give you your advantage. Your battles are going to be kind of micro heavy, right? You're going to have to be able to make good micromanagement decisions in battle with those specific units in order to win fights early on, okay? The next thing to note is you start completely surrounded by enemies, right? You start at war with these dwarves. Obviously, anybody starts at war with somebody, but you have the greenskins to the west, and in most of the campaigns I've played here as Imric, the greenskins beat the dwarves, and in general, in most of my Mortal Empires campaigns, the greenskins get very strong very early on, okay? It's very likely they will be a threat to you from the west sooner or later. You also have Clan Eshin here. I guarantee you they're going to beat these guys, the little greenskin tribe here, and they're going to be a significant problem for you, especially because they have the benefit of the terrain, and they have nowhere else to go. Like, if they fight you or the Dark Elves, like, it's probably going to be you first, especially as the player. Then you have Malice Darkblade. You know, he doesn't usually threaten me right away, but it's inevitable, right? You're a high elf, he's a dark elf. He's gonna fight you, and he has some good territory for you to take. Like, this is a good economic province, like I talked about. The last thing is, like, so you have the last defenders down here. If this was the Vortex map, I would say they're going to be your enemy too. They're your only real possibility for an ally at the start of this campaign, besides, like, the dwarves, if/when you can get to them if they're surviving. But the Skaven have been dominant down here for most of my recent campaigns. I want to say that the recent patch is just, for whatever reason, they have the edge that they need. Skaven are probably going to take this. So like I said, you're surrounded on all sides by enemies. That means that you're the only person you can count on, so you have to play things right, okay? The most important thing in this entire campaign is moving fast in the early stages and taking out the Skaven, okay? You want to wipe out these dwarves, like, one by one, build up your army, like, just standard spearmen and archers, and push through, right? You don't want to linger trying to, like, sack a city for experience or anything like that. What you want to do is clean up this dwarf grouping, and then be able to get over to fight the Skaven before they eliminate these greenskins, right? The ideal situation is for the Skaven to, like, be running through this, like, walkway here, right? And either attack the settlement, take it, and be low health, or like just find an army sitting out here in the open. If you can take out one full army of theirs just by kind of catching them off guard, that's a huge win for you. And that's kind of what you need, right? If you give them time to solidify this province, they can just underway jump into the Fortress of Vorag. They can underway jump to the Darkhold. They can come up here and raid your territory here to bait you into leaving your territory and then just jump across, right? Whereas like crossing these swamps might take you 2 or 3 turns to do, as you can see. And like the fact that you have to go around this and they can just cut it in 1 turn puts you at a pretty big disadvantage there. So anyways, the point is you want to cut the dwarves down first quickly so that you can go and take the Skaven by surprise. Like honestly, even if the greenskins here are still alive, you should fight and kill the Skaven first and then come back and clean up the greenskins. This is also where, like I talked about, you're going to want to consider building walls even early on in the game, because like even when you're fighting the Skaven, if one of their armies gets free and they go to like Darkhold or the Fortress of Vorag, they jump past your army or whatever happens, you don't want to have to, like you want to be able to buy yourself the time you need to get back or to like draw up an army quickly to be able to counteract that. It can be pretty irritating sometimes, but you also are going to want to prepare, like, because it's possible that the greenskins do well enough that as soon as you wrap up the Skaven in the east, that the greenskins start attacking you in the west, and it's almost inevitable that these provinces, like all 4 of these settlements, are going to need defense against the greenskins pretty much no matter what in this campaign. So I'll jump ahead here a little bit so you can see what it looks like for me. And I mean, you can see, right, we're 20 turns in, the greenskins already have all this. They're on our front doorstep. We don't have walls here in Mount Greyhag, but that's probably what I'll build next. We got walls producing here. I've got the archives building creating, but that's because you really want this, like, this will take priority over the walls. But we've got the Skaven wiped out. We've got a little weird greenskin dude to deal with. The next target that I would recommend is going to be Malice Darkblade. Okay, there's a good chance that he'll be fighting the Lizardmen instead of you. So you can, there's a good chance that you'll just come in here and take all 3 of these basically uncontested. You also might want to consider sending a hero down to the Lizardmen so that you can get them to invite you into war with Malice so that you don't get pulled into a war against Nagorond that lasts the entire game. It's not like they're going to attack you, but diplomatically it makes it look like you are at war with a much more powerful opponent, right? And you can see they're not at war with the Lizardmen yet, but at least in this campaign, that's what ended up happening as they went to war with the Lizardmen. It's not a bad idea to get some scouting done in this area regardless with some heroes, whether that's to discover the Lizardmen or just to see how well the Skaven are doing, or to consider scouting the territory out for yourself. All of these are good options. You also might be able to get a good, like, find a decent ally in the Lizardmen if they can secure some of the south while you're securing the north, if they can fight the Skaven while you're fighting the greenskins. However, that's not likely. At best, you're going to have them as a trade partner for 10 to 20 turns, and then they're going to get wiped out. But that's just kind of a thing that happens. But like I said, the reason you want to attack Malice is so you can get control of all these, like, port settlements, right? Because you can boost them with the embassy building and make yourself a decent amount of money. It's also going to start establishing, like, acquiring influence for you, which you're going to want to be able to get better level heroes. So it's just kind of a good combination all around. During that time period, like I've said, you got to be careful of the greenskins, right? They're still not at war with me here, but as soon as they see an opportunity, they're going to jump in. You're probably going to want at least like a half-size army here to defend. And yeah, you're going to want to put up walls in as many of these settlements as you can. It's very likely the greenskins will try to like slip by here and go to your capital if it's the least defended territory. So just some things to keep in mind. If you can, you want to try to discover the dwarves and befriend them as well, but it's just not a priority at this stage of the campaign. One last thing to touch on before we move on to the next phase is that there's also that event. I think we've already completed it by now. When you start out, you get a mission for Caledor, right? To like loot, occupy, or sack 6 total settlements. And when you do, they'll give you the opportunity to confederate Caledor. In most of my campaigns, I don't go for that. Like you can see, despite having all this territory, my income kind of sucks still, and I only have one army right now, right? I don't have any trade partners. Taking Caledor isn't going to get me any trade partners. If you really wanted to, you could do that event and then just kind of give up on this territory, but I don't know if I really recommend that, especially if you're actually going for a victory. Your victory conditions pretty much are all this, but then you have to acquire Caledor at some point, though you can just kind of do that with military allies once you discover somebody over here later. But yeah, having to have like a full-size army stationed here to defend yourself against the Dark Elves' inevitable attack, plus having to navigate all this territory, it's pretty challenging to do. And just in general, like, I mean, this one doesn't look too bad, but you can see Marathi's already here, right? And so, like, there's some campaigns are better than others, but if you take Caledor, either like Tyrion and Etain is going to be stronger than you anyway and is just going to take over all of this, so you don't really have a chance to expand or grow here, or Marathi is going to be aggressively invading and you're going to have to fight and have to defend, and it's just going to spread your attention too thin. So I don't know if I really recommend that. I do think that covers everything for the short-term campaign and concerns, however. I'm going to move forward a little bit so we can get a better view of what comes next, and we're going to talk about what is your long-term strategy and campaign approach for kind of moving into the next phase of this campaign, and from there you can kind of make your own decisions about how to wrap things up, and that should be it. So, you've successfully taken over Malice Darkblade, you've conquered the Dragon Isles, and now you have to do something. You can't just sit in the corner forever. You do eventually have to move westward and fight somebody. So I think at this point you have two real options. One, pretty obvious. You can fight the Greenskins, okay? Mountain territory is going to be good for you. It's going to be a nightmare to navigate, but at least Imric has the immunity to mountain attrition, right? Not to mention, if you can keep the dwarves from dying, they'll prove a valuable ally. There's actually a good chance, and you can see here, that they will lose. We can't tell yet, but if I were to jump another 30 turns forward, like in this campaign I choose to fight the Greenskins, I end up taking both the Greenskins and the dwarves' original, like, provinces, right? There's a good chance the dwarves will be losing badly enough that you'll get a bunch of valuable territory and still get to be friends with them and make a trade agreement with them. At the very least, the Greenskins are probably the most significant early game threat for like any Mortal Empires campaign in the old world. So anything you can do to like relieve that pressure from the rest of the world is going to be highly approved of by everyone, and it's just going to help, like, it's going to help you and everybody else survive, right? The other option is to go and fight the Skaven. The Skaven are usually the most like dominant mid to late game threat in this part of the campaign, and there's a couple. Well, so those are your choices, right? Fight the Greenskins or fight the Skaven. Let's talk first about why you would fight the Greenskins. Okay, like I said already, they're strong. They're an immediate and relentless threat, especially in the early game, and they have good territory, right? If we take a look, like, there's a gold mine here. There is wood here. There's, I believe there's an iron mine here. There's definitely an iron mine here. There's a salt mine here. Like, there's a bunch of trade resources you can get from them. And like I said, they're going to be attacking you whether or not you decide to wipe them out. So the choice is, do you want, like, you're going to have to defend these territories from them, like, consistently regardless, okay? It's a great way to simultaneously eliminate a powerful threat and also expand your infrastructure and economy, as well as giving you, like, if you're expanding in this northern section, you can meet the border princes, you can meet the southern realms in general, you can maybe even meet Reichland and establish some deals with them, get on the good side with the forces of order, right? You have a really good chance of getting alliances with the dwarves if you start fighting the Greenskins. The downside of this plan, like I said, their territory is a nightmare to navigate, right? You don't have the underway, and they do. Every base you take, like, you have to be methodical about expanding, and you basically have to, like, you have to wait for them to come to you, beat them in a fight, and then take one small expansion. And it's just hard, right? Because they can go around and jump through to hit territories that you can't necessarily defend directly. The other thing, like I said, only Imric is immune to mountain attrition. Any other armies that you bring through here are going to take attrition in some of these mountain territories. I don't know if we can see it here. I'd have to find another army. And the last thing is the Badlands are uninhabitable for you, right? The Badlands are the wasteland type. This is so like all of the Western Badlands except maybe Elkrond, but I'm pretty sure all the Western Badlands, pieces of the Eastern Badlands, Mordheim, Southern Badlands, all that's going to be garbage territory for you, right? But you're probably going to need to take it in order to wipe out the Greenskins completely, right? That's where that fight is going to lead you to once you've taken out the mountains. So those are the pros and cons of the Greenskin War. Let's talk about the Skaven War, okay? So Imrik in particular, I think, has the right tools to deal with them, and they do also have good territory down here. When I say Imrik has the right tools, cavalry and dragons, right? In my opinion, dragons are a good counter to artillery. You can fly past them, you dragon fire them, and you might destroy an artillery piece with a single shot. You have cavalry, which are a great way of dealing with the Skaven's various like ranged and missile units and their weapons teams, right? And you still have like good enough infantry and missile units of your own to counter their infantry. So dealing with the Skaven isn't as big of a deal for Imrik as it can be for some other factions, right? There's also no uninhabitable lands. The jungle territory, yes, it's unpleasant for you, but it's not that bad. There's some unique trade resources here. You have the Golden Tower here, which has a unique building that boosts your money. And then this is desert territory here, mountains, and then more desert, right? All of that, like the mountains and the desert, those are going to be suitable climates for you. So this is actually really good territory for you to control. You can also meet some minor factions if you go this way, right? There's like a dwarf faction here, there's the wood elves here, and with a little bit of, and like all the minor factions in this region, with a little bit of influence, you can easily ally with them. There are also the Tomb Kings. I probably would recommend destroying the Tomb Kings because you kind of want to take most or all of the desert for yourself because it's suitable, but it's very easy to ally yourself with the Tomb Kings regardless, right? So basically, it's probably an easier fight for you, and the suitability of their territory is better overall. The downsides are that they do, like, their artillery is still a threat, right? Like, until you can get to them, like, it can be challenging to take them out, right? Your infantry lines may take some damage from their artillery while you're trying to navigate getting your dragons and your dragon princes there to hit their backline safely. Your dragons are vulnerable to missile fire along the way, so you kind of have to launch a combined attack. Again, I've said that this is kind of a more like micro-intensive, like battle-focused campaign, okay? They're also hard to wipe out. Like, despite the fact that you can clean them up here pretty easily, it's very likely they will retreat to the north into these mountain territories, and these are kind of hard to navigate. It's also pretty likely at some point that they will take these settlements, which means they're one underway jump away from being able to besiege your capital on the next turn. You'll also, like, even if you go down here and you start fighting them, like I said, it's pretty much a guarantee that you're going to be attacked by the Greenskins anyway. So while you're attacking the Skaven in the south, you still have to defend yourself properly in the north. And you're actually, if you go this way, you're actually probably further from this coastline than you would be if you go through the mountains. So that's something I want to touch on in a little bit, but I wanted to cover this because this is your big choice, right? Now that we've got through the early game, this is your choice. Do you want to attack the Greenskins or do you want to attack the Skaven? Okay, keep in mind, whoever you fight first, you pretty much have to fight the other one second. If you fight the Greenskins first, it's going to free up some territory for the Skaven to snatch up, and it's going to leave them uncontested, so they're going to grow. Same thing here, though. If you attack the Skaven, the Greenskins are probably going to beat everybody else that they're fighting, unless they're really, like, assaulting you, in which case you might be, like, reasonably undefended. So, yeah, just something to keep in mind. You're going to have to probably fight both of them, okay? The next little thing I want to touch on is, so we talked about fighting Malice Darkblade, we're talking about fighting the Greenskins. Anybody you decide to fight in this campaign, you need to make sure that you wipe them out, right? In this campaign, Malice, you can see Libaris, right? I take the Dragon Isles. I talked about he might be at war with the Lizardmen. Well, when you take all of a character's settlements, they have to take something or else they suffer attrition. Malice ends up living here for like the next 30 or 40 turns in my campaign because I'm so focused on ensuring I win the war with the Greenskins. Like every 10 turns, he sends another raid out to the Dragon Isles, and it's just a huge distraction. Anybody that you fight in this game, whether it's the Dark Elves, the Greenskins, or the Skaven, like try to commit to just that one fight and make sure that you wipe them out completely before you move on to the next one. Otherwise, like the Greenskins might live with a territory or two in the Badlands and just like they send a raid on you every 5 turns. It's nonsense, okay? I mean, it's true for pretty much any campaign you're playing, but especially so for this one, right? You don't want like just mystery underway jumps happening and stuff like that. Another important thing to touch on is you want to get to the coastline early if you can, okay? Because you can't trade with anybody else until you have a direct line there. And if you're beating the Greenskins, the Border Princes are going to take up some of this land. Tilia is going to take up some of this land unless they're really losing to the Skaven, right? And Khemri is going to take this land too. It's even possible if Bretonnia is doing well that they're going to eventually confederate Reponse and take over some of this land for themselves. So you might get landlocked in this campaign, right? And for the High Elves, since trade is such an important part, like you need to be able to figure out some kind of coastal settlement here so that you can trade with the High Elves, you can trade with the Lizardmen, you can trade with the Empire, Bretonnia, like all of these factions, especially once you get into the late game, you need to have something, like you need to have a land route to the sea to be able to trade with any of these people. Otherwise, you're going to be severely limited on trade partners. And as the High Elves, it means you're going to struggle pretty harshly to be able to like it's just going to cripple your economy, right? It's going to limit the number of armies that you can produce. So keep in mind that like one of your like ongoing priorities is to get to the coast. It's worthwhile to overextend and make bad choices in the fight against the Greenskins or the Skaven or whoever if it means you can land a single coastal city and will be able to hold it, right? The last thing to touch on is you want to try to work out diplomacy with the High Elves at some point. So we have this quest battle with Caledor, or the Empowered Armor of Caledor for Imric. When you do this, it will teleport you here for the quest battle. This will discover this territory for you, technically, and it will make it possible for you to do diplomacy with these factions. Yeah, and you can see here, by the way, this is why I don't like to confederate Caledor. This is the kind of thing that can happen. But so when I do this in this campaign, it reveals Yveret and Etain for me. I can start making diplomacy happen with them. And technically, this province, owning this province, is part of your victory condition. So you might as well confederate the High Elves, or at least start working towards it. It's something to consider, right? Like I've said before, I don't know if it's really good or bad to try to manage Ulthuan and the mountains at the same time. The answer is it depends, right? It's situational. So it's just something to keep in mind, right? If you can hold and push on both regions, it's great. If you can't, if you're losing ground on both, it's bad, right? Sometimes it depends on how well the High Elves themselves are doing here when you take them over. But something to keep in mind is this is kind of like a passive ongoing thing. Try to build your diplomacy with the High Elves so you can eventually take this over. This is good territory for you to have too. So, with that being said, I believe that covers everything that I wanted to touch on for this guide, right? We've talked about what your immediate goals should be in the short term and how to achieve them. We've talked about what your options are in the long term, the different routes that you can take to get to the end of the campaign, right? We've talked about what are some of your important buildings that you want to focus on, what a good army composition looks like for this faction, and the kinds of things you can focus on to get there in the early and mid game. Besides that, there's not really too much to discuss. For victory conditions, you need to wipe out Grimgor, Malice Darkblade, and then the clan Eshin. You also need control over the Western Badlands. Yeah, so you need the Western Badlands and Caledor, and then like these 3 provinces, right? So just something to keep in mind for your goals. Doesn't mean you can't like military ally your way to that, which is pretty easy, right? And then you just consider the options that I've presented for what your mid game is. The sad part is like the further away somebody is from you, especially in the late game, like the better an option they are for you to attack. But of course that means they're further away from you, so it's harder to get to them, right? If we're looking at like, do I fight the Empire or the Lizardmen or the Dark Elves, right? That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. But once you get momentum in your favor in this section of the map, it's really not too difficult of a campaign. The problem is getting to that point where the momentum is in your favor in the first place. So, with that being said, I believe that covers everything I wanted to. Kind of jumping ahead just to prove that what I've talked about does work as a method for completing this campaign. A little bit of a flex, though by turn 151 you could probably be farther. But I think that covers everything I wanted to in terms of getting started and getting through this campaign. It's definitely been a challenging one for me in the past, so I hope that it helps some of you out there who may have struggled with it yourselves. Hopefully you learned something here, or it helps you with your campaigns. If you do have any comments or any questions that you have further on this, please leave them in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day. We'll see you on the next video. Have a good one.